Appointed, which, by the way, I'd love for the press to cover why we've had 3 in the last 4 or 5 years, to talk about the incompetencies that have been going on, to talk about Senate Bill 1, which they have, as you see in this election, it's working. The way that bill was designed, it is working. It's sowing mass confusion, not just here in Harris County, in Tarrant County, Travis County, Dallas County. And so go report in those other counties as well, too, of what's been going on and the high rejection rate of our vote by mail that has just been a complete disaster under our Republican state leadership. So we're going to tell the full story here. We're joined by the Texas Democratic Party, which is always on the forefront of making sure that we are being as aggressive as possible when we're talking about these things. So I'm going to introduce Texas Democratic Party Chairman Gilberto Hinojosa, and we'll have some other folks speak as well.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank everyone for being here today. We're here this morning united as Democratic leaders, legislators, and voters to speak out on behalf of our Texas voters. Today we want to say to Texas Republicans, we won't be your scapegoat, nor will we allow you to shift blame away from the disaster, as you recently called it, that is a consequence of your failed administration and your inability to completely manage all aspects of the election. You know, this morning I sat down and I listened to the tape of that press conference yesterday, and the audacity of these people to say the things that they say, first of all, to question the qualifications of the elections administrator, when the very Secretary of State of the state of Texas claimed to shame is having been the lawyer for Donald Trump in attempting to overturn the results of the election. These folks are the same folks that when we started trying to get voter registration cards from the Secretary of State's office said they didn't have any. They have made it elite. They have refused to allow us to vote, to register online and set up a system that probably 48 states in the country have today where you can register to vote online, and they want us to register with paper ballots. They don't have paper ballots in the Secretary of State's office. These are the same people who are criticizing the administration of the election here in Harris County, who, when we asked for the voter list to be provided to us, gave us a voter list that left out 300,000 voters from Travis County and Hays County and another 25,000 voters in counties across the state of Texas, and had no excuse for it whatsoever. These are the same Republican administration that passed a voting law that's SB 1 that made it extremely difficult for the elderly and the disabled to vote by mail. And as a consequence of what they did, today in the state of Texas, we had 40%, up to 40% of the applications being rejected because the elderly in this state and the disabled people were confused by the myriad of requirements that they set up in order to confuse them. These are the same people that are criticizing us. Let me tell you something. A lot of these applications were rejected because the voter put down their driver's license number in the application. The Secretary of State's office, because of their connection to the Texas Department of Public Safety, has every single voter's driver's license number in the state of Texas. Yet, even though they were obligated to do this, they failed to provide the counties with these with these driver's license numbers until people had already submitted their applications, had them rejected. And what is worse is that when our elections administrators and county clerks who are running elections across the state of Texas saw these rejected applications and wanted to do something about it, were prevented from doing it because the Republican Party made it a crime, a felony for them to pick up the phone and try to help an elderly person that is confused by this confusing law that was specifically intended to confuse them. This is the kind of conduct that this Republican administration and the Secretary of State has engaged in to discourage people from going out to vote. In a democracy where we're supposed to encourage people, they have made it difficult for people to go out and vote. And they all did it following the corrupt Donald Trump's big lie. When it was clear that in the state of Texas in 2020, there was no proof of voter fraud across the state of Texas, yet they enacted these laws solely to prevent people of color and the disabled and young people from going out to vote, because they know that that is the only way that they can stay in power. So we are here today to expose the hypocrisy of the Republican Party. We are here today to make sure that the people in the state of Texas know that the confusion that was caused as a result of these laws that were passed by the Republican Party was not an accidental confusion. It was an intentional confusion designed to prevent people from voting. And we are here today also to tell the voters of the state of Texas that we will not tolerate that. That we will start a campaign that says, let the people vote. Let the people vote. That we will start educating the voters across the state of Texas about these laws that were designed to prevent them from voting, to make sure that they know that they can vote and that these Republicans cannot stop them from voting, and that we will do what we need to do to train more election workers, to recruit more election workers, and to make sure that they're not afraid of being criminally prosecuted. Because in counties like Harris County and Bexar County and in the Rio Grande Valley and in Dallas County and Travis County, and where 70% of the people of the state of Texas, we have democratically elected district attorneys that will not use these laws to persecute election workers who are trying to help people to go out and vote. So folks, let the people vote. That's the campaign that we're going to ensure that people will be prepared for the November election, and we will hold the Secretary of State accountable for his malfeasance and his corruption in running this election in 2022, and make sure that we do not have a repeat of it in the general election. Thank you. Let me bring up Jamar Brown, who's our co-executive director of the Texas Democratic Party.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chairman, and thank you all for being here. And thank you for having us today. One of the things that's very important that the chairman just discussed is we're talking about a new law that's in fact right now. We're seeing that across the state, and we've seen the clear negligence in this election across the state. It's fundamentally important to make sure that we're doing everything possible to protect the vote. And as the chairman said, we're doing all of that. We believe that Texans deserve better. We believe that every Texan deserves their right to vote and deserves their right to vote in an effective manner. What I'll share with you is what we've seen is a clear negligence. We've seen clear inadequacies in this primary process. As you all know, we just finished an election just a few hours ago, if you will, and we're still actually waiting on results across the state. But some of the things that we've seen is, we've seen Dan Patrick, who shepherded this law through the legislature. We've seen him break the law himself in the aspect where he sent out mail ballot applications. We've actually sent a letter to District Attorney Jose Garza in Travis County asking for a criminal investigation for this very thing. We have to ensure that people are following the laws that they actually pass. What's important also to see here is we've seen over 300,000 people left off voter files. We've received thousands and thousands of calls into our voter protection hotline where people were having issues with their mail ballot applications, where people were having issues getting to the polling locations, where people were having issues knowing what precinct they were even supposed to be at to actually go and vote across the state. And so we're seeing that across the board, and there's a clear responsibility with the chief elections officer of the state to make sure that everyone is able to vote and that the process is fair, the process is smooth, and the process is efficient. We also saw, as part of the Secretary of State's office, we also saw where election workers were not trained. They were trained late. We also saw in places where they were late in sharing advisories with campaigns and with election officials across the state. And so we're standing here together to ensure, going just through this first election with SB 1 in effect, we're talking about voters, thousands of voters that we've heard, not only here in Harris County, but in all counties across the state, where they faced different issues because the election administrators did not receive the support, the resources, and the information that they needed to have from the Secretary of State's office. And so I believe that's important. So as we get to not only the May 24th runoff and the November general election, there are some things that need to change. And we're going to make sure that we're fighting every single day, that we're working with elected officials and every election official in this state. We're going to make sure that we're helping to train more election workers. We're going to make sure that that's there so we have the staffing needed. And so those are things that we're looking to do and think, well, we have to do. Because every Texan who wants to vote in May and in November, they should be able to show up to the poll and be able to do that. If you need to vote by mail, you should be able to do that and do that effectively. We've had people where they've had to go 2-3 times to be able to try and vote by mail or go into the polling location or to go and vote early. And so these inadequacies impact not only just our democracy in our state, but it impacts the people who want to participate in the democracy. And they deserve better and they deserve fairness. And so we're fighting at the Texas Democratic Party, along with our partners and allies every single day, to ensure that when people go vote, they have their fundamental right and that they're actually able to have their vote counted. So thank you all for having me.
And before we move on to our next speaker, I also want to point out that Justin Concepcion from Senator Boris Miles' office is here as well, too, because that's how important it is to talk about these things and to tell the full story. If she's ready, we'll have State Representative John Rosenthal come up and share his experience about what happened to him at the polling location.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm John Rosenthal, Texas State Representative, House District 135 in Northwest Houston. So first, I want to talk about this bill, SB 1, that made it more difficult to vote in Texas. Just as a bottom line, in the state, in the one state of the United States where it was already the most difficult state in the union to register and cast a ballot, our state legislature emphatically chose to make it even more difficult to vote in this state. Voter suppression occurs in many different flavors and many different forms. Sometimes it's erecting barriers, sometimes it's intimidation and threats, and things of that nature. This bill has all of the above. It's basically pull out all the stops to make it as difficult as you could possibly make it to vote in this state. And the premise for that is based on a lie, and we all talk about the big lie, but the big lie here in Texas is that there's even a possibility of widespread voter fraud. So with a conservative party who's been in charge of this process for close to 30 years now, they're basically telling you, they're telling us that they haven't figured out how to run a safe and secure election, which is a bald-faced lie to begin with. There's no evidence of voter fraud. And if there was, our state's attorney general, who's under indictment himself, would have been able to find some after expending millions of dollars in resources over years of time to close less than a handful of cases of voter fraud. And I'm a numbers guy, so I always say things like, your chances of finding voter fraud in Texas are less than your chances of getting struck by lightning, and that is literally true. All right, so with all that said, there's more going on than just this SB 1 bill, this new law, because I don't know if you all saw this, but I myself had a problem with the data tied to my driver's license. I went to vote in the precinct closest to where I live, where I always vote. Like, clerks in this place know me, and I handed my driver's license, literally the same piece of plastic I've been carrying in my pocket for about 4 years now, that worked fine in the last election, and they put it in there, and the election judge, a Republican person who I know personally, looks up at me with this strange look in his eyes, and he said, and I said, is there a problem? And he says, the data tied to your driver's license says you are not eligible to vote in this election. Like, I have a screenshot of that. It came up for me, a Texas state representative, on the voters, in the voting location, their information showed I was not eligible. So this is not a result of the bill directly. This is a result of a data screw up at the state level, which we're now finding out is much larger than we thought. And so this is obviously the reason that some of our mail ballot applications are being rejected, even if they have the correct information on it, because the wrong information is tied to the record. So I went through a process to cure that, but I'm a pretty bold guy. How many people are going to just walk away and say, oh no, I'm not gonna, like they offer me a provisional ballot? People know that we've had folks sentenced to jail, to years in jail for casting a wrong provisional ballot or an improper provisional ballot. So it's voter intimidation in the highest form. It's hard to imagine that this data issue is not another layer on top of that. We all need to speak out against it. We all need to do something about it. The whole point of representative democracy is you want the people to vote. You want the people to pick the representatives of their choice, all right? And after Harris County employed a bunch of innovative, excellent methods, and we had massive record turnout. What does the state legislature do in response to record turnout in the state's most populated county? Make illegal all those things that we used to increase voter participation. It's wrong, it's morally unjust, it's unethical, and we need to fight against it. So sorry for running on so long. Thank you so much.
Next, we'll have State Representative Jean Wu.
You know, the thing that shocks me about this is why is anyone actually surprised that this happened? We've been telling you that this was going to happen since last year. When we passed, when we worked on SB1, or what would have become SB1, the first session, the first special session, the second special session, third special session, we said time and time again, this exact thing would happen. And it all went to deaf ears for the Republicans because this is what they intended. We told y'all over and over again that hundreds of thousands of mail-in ballots would be rejected for no good reason of people who have been voting for decades because of their law. We told them that to their face over and over again. It was on the floor. We put it in amendments. We told them in back rooms. This is what they intended. Why are we surprised? We told them that the laws that they passed would create these massive delays. Why are we surprised? We told them that a demand for a paper trail, as we have done in Harris County, if you want safety, if you want security, there is a time cost. We have been telling you this over and over and over again. No one has been listening. And the words that have fallen on our Republican colleagues in the legislature, the governor of the state of Texas, the lieutenant governor, the speaker of the House, they all knew that this was going to happen. This was the intent. And we demand accounting. This is what happens. Tarrant County uses the same voter system that we did. They had the exact same problems. But guess what? We're like 5 times the size of Tarrant County. Did you hear the lieutenant governor say one word about Tarrant County, a Republican-controlled county? Did you hear the governor say one word? Did you hear the Secretary of State say one word about Tarrant County? No. Because that's the plan. The plan all along, from day one, the plan that Democrats tried to derail again and again, going as far as to leave our families, leave our jobs, leave our homes for over a month to break quorum, to stop this legislation. This is what we were trying to stop. This is what we were trying to stop. But their desire for this was too great. You know what? In 2020, when Donald Trump pushed the lie that there was rampant fraud everywhere, that he should be reelected as president, that he was actually reelected as president, that lie, all of us elected officials knew that was bull. But some of the Republicans heard it and say, you know, he's got something there. That sounds like a good idea. Because we know that the state is turning Democratic. We know that Beto has a chance and has a good chance. And so if Beto wins and wins by small margins, they want to be able to come in and sow doubt into everything. They are willing to create chaos in our democracy for their political gain. And this is what we should have been expecting all along, because this is what they've been telling us that they were doing all along. Again and again, no one was listening.
I'm going to bring up Congresswoman Sheila Jackson Lee, who is fighting the good fight in the federal government.
Shame has been brought down on the state of Texas for those who we hold in high esteem. And the shame is in disregard to President Lyndon Baines Johnson, who created an enormous opportunity to vote by the 1965 Voting Rights Act. When that bill was passed, it did not have a Democratic label or a Republican label. It indicated that you should not be barred from voting based upon race. Did not ask for your party. It wanted to open the door to voting to every single person. Bring shame on Barbara Jordan, Mickey Leland, who were only able to serve because of the 1965 Voting Rights Act. We're a state that opened the door to voting to everyone. And Barbara Jordan amended the 1965 Voting Rights Act for language minorities so that every single person who might have been prohibited from voting, Hispanics, can now be covered and reinforced by the federal law. Now we come to the moment of shame, when Texas is the hardest state to vote in the nation. There is no doubt. When every single voting time for the last decade, there's been voter intimidation, now reinforced, enhanced, put into law by SB 1. We are ripe for federal intervention. So let me explain the elements that have put us in this situation. If you recall, there was early vote. Early vote seemed to go smoothly, and it did, under the operations of the election administrator. You may say they're a Democrat. She has no label. Under the county government, because they decided that you could vote, Republicans and Democrats, in the same site during early vote. But that didn't cause enough controversy for our friends, Republicans. Besides criminalizing voting, they wanted to make it difficult. We must have a separate polling place. We're not going to vote with the Democrats on election day, primary day. We will get our own sites. And there lies the crisis. You had to recruit, you had to find sites, and it imploded on primary day. They didn't have enough staff. Their sites were in pocket holes where people could not find it. It might have been in the backyard, locked away behind a tree. It made it very difficult. You also have to realize that voting now has become criminalized. How intimidating it is to try to get a volunteer grandma who has done it all these years, and you put them through training and say, if you don't do this, if you do this, you're subject to criminal penalties. Shaming President Johnson, shaming Barbara Jordan, shaming Mickey Leland, shaming their legacy. Shaming Henry B. Gonzalez, shaming Ann Richards. And so having the hardest pathway to voting, and let me say to the media, doing a good job regarding the mail ballots. Can you imagine the intimidation? We still wound up with a 30% plus rejection rate. Should a person who has every right, who has toiled, who has worked, who has heritage, who is a decent human being, who is a family person, who is elderly, who's a veteran, who's disabled, should they be denied the right to vote? We are living a nightmare. And let me be very clear. The paper trail was an issue like a decade ago. Things move slowly in government. So people today are not really familiar with why are we doing this? It was a big deal a decade ago. We want to make sure that our ballots are secure. Representative Wu is right. We responded as a county to the people's cry. We are stuck with the kind of machines we can get under this Texas jurisdiction of the Secretary of State, who happens to be aggressively Republican in this instance. That is not supposed to be their role. They are the Secretary of State that deals with unbiased, nonpartisan elections to help county governments around the state. So number one, we couldn't get any resources from the Secretary of State to be able to help in this instance. We're stuck with the machine. We didn't know that the paper was going to stick together. I got calls that I had to call because the scanning machine broke down, and persons not used to it, not because they're Republicans or Democrats. You know, I don't know where we got into this attacking each other about voting. It would seem that as Americans, we'd want everybody to vote. There was this symbol or this process that you could actually turn the scanner and reprogram it yourself. But friends, these are volunteers. These are not tech proficient, everyday in tech business volunteers. These are the kind of volunteers that America applauds. These are the stand-up guys that say, I'm going to come and help you during Election Day. These are the people we go in and say, thank you for being here. In the old days. And that's where the delay came with that paper trail ballot that you had to pull out. Remember, the longest ballot probably in the nation. And you had to walk and put it in. We could have gotten through the day if there had been joint cooperation, but just like the big lie that is still being the campaign promise of our opponents, the big lie, the immediate response was not to come together to get more time, but it was to sue, to embarrass, and to suggest partisan politics in voting. Well, you know what? There's a lady that integrated the Democratic National Convention from Mississippi, Fannie Lou Hamer. She said she wasn't going to take it anymore, and she was sick and tired of being sick and tired. Democrats want people to vote. We want Harris Countyans to vote. We want Houstonians to vote. We want Texans to vote. We have not stood in the way of voting. Thank you to all of the state reps for running for justice, for leaving for justice. I won't say fleeing, for going for justice, because they wanted all of us to vote. It is frustrating to have now to come home to this divisiveness where our chair has to come down from Austin to bring truth to this county. There were election workers that had to go to the hospital because of the stress, because they wanted to do right. And I am not going to let them take the hit on this. This was a purposeful attempt to politicize elections. This was a purposeful attempt to quash the legacy of this state, which was, as big as we are, we want everyone to vote. And the most serious of this, and it is well documented, you can be criminally prosecuted. And there are Republicans today that are pursuing Democratic precinct chairs and judges on nonsensical reasons. But you know how intimidating that is? How scary that is? So let me indicate that I do think that the Department of Justice is crucially needed before we move into November, which is going to be the nightmare. That is going to be a serious moment. Let me remind you, poll watchers will be able to interfere inside the poll with voters, people who are assisting, the judges. They will most likely be in this neighborhood, where Barbara Jordan grew up and Mickey Leland. They will most likely be in the East End, or maybe Gulfton. For those elderly, young, minority, disabled, because maybe they will try to make it there because they're so frightened about the mail ballot, they will be looking at them. And they will make an effort to charge people criminally. Some people have said there have been fistfights at the polling places. I don't want that to happen. But I do know that we have some very serious preparing to do to avoid dangerous behavior in the November election. And I think it is imperative that the Department of Justice look seriously at the behavior of the Secretary of State and the state elected officers interfering with Harris County, not in a way of helping, but in a way of distracting and intimidating. So my message is to voters that no one can take your precious right to vote from you. We are standing here today to give warning, not to you, because we want you to come, but give warning to those who would politicize and make partisan the act of voting, the act of counting, which, as I close, be very clear, the Democrats joined in the TRO to ensure that night that they were not criminalized and they could continue to vote. Make it very clear. And if that would have been the news story, then I would say that we're on the right page. We're not. And so in the name of those we hold in high esteem, in the names that I have just called, in the names of the people standing here, in the names of our veteran, 95 years old, who almost could not vote but for his daughter re-registering him to get a number that he could put on the mail ballot application, in their names, we are not going to stand idly by while voters are taken advantage of, while precinct workers are taken advantage of, because it is our birthright. And as others are fighting in countries far away, being bloodied because of their stand for democracy, losing lives under siege, it breaks my heart for the Ukrainian people. Then we have at least minimally to express our fight to ensure that justice is done when we vote, and that we're not labeled Democrat and Republicans, we're labeled Americans and Houstonians and Harris Countyans, and we are going to vote. So whatever you choose to do, the party that is still standing on the big lie, I'm going to stand on the American flag and stand under it and the Constitution, because that's what voting is, your birthright.
Thank you, Congresswoman. Next up, we have former County Clerk Chris Hollins.
Good morning. In 2020, right here in Houston, in Harris County, we did everything that we could, even in the midst of a global pandemic, to ensure unparalleled access for voters to be able to exercise their constitutional right at the ballot box. And we didn't do that for Democrats. We didn't do that for Republicans. We did that for American citizens who are guaranteed this right by our Constitution and its amendments. And so whether you were black, white, or brown, regardless of the part of town that you lived in, regardless of the language that you spoke, what religion you practiced, who you loved, if you were in Harris County, if you were in Houston at that time, you could vote, and you could do so safely, and you could do so conveniently, and you could do so with the peace of mind that your vote was going to be counted. And we did not do that alone. Hundreds of civil servants at the county clerk's office at that time, thousands upon thousands of volunteers from our community, partners in the business community and nonprofits and civil rights and human rights groups came together to help us guarantee and protect democracy in the Houston area in 2020. And the results spoke for themselves. Nearly 1.7 million of our neighbors came out and exercised that constitutional right, that right to vote that our ancestors bled and died for, and that we protect today. And we should have been proud of that. We were proud of that. We set a national standard for what voter access looks like. And numerous jurisdictions across this country have followed our example to this day. But Republicans in Austin immediately went to work to try and tear that down. They immediately went to work to make voting more difficult, less safe, less accessible to American citizens. And they did that despite not only this being the most accessible election in the history of this state, but it was also the safest and most secure election in the history of the United States of America. And that is not a quote from me. That is not a quote from Houston or Harris County or Democrats. That is a quote from Donald Trump's Department of Homeland Security. And in addition to that statement, our Secretary of State's office then declared this to be a safe and secure election. And we were very proud of that. But again, our governor, our lieutenant governor, so many Republicans in Austin went to work immediately to begin to break down these threads of our democracy, to make it harder for Texans like you and me, for folks in Houston who are older, who have disabilities, who have challenges when it comes to access, to take away and break down their constitutional right to vote. And the folks behind me, our colleagues in the House, they wouldn't stand for it. They broke ranks. They took the fight from Austin all the way to Washington, D.C. to demand protection of our right to vote, this critical right in our democracy that makes America what it is. And they stayed there, and they left their families and their jobs and their livelihoods. And they fought. But Dan Patrick, not once, not twice, but 3 times called for a special session of the legislature to pass these voter suppression laws. And these laws are rearing their heads today, and these laws are having their exact intended effect, which is to make it harder for folks like you and me to vote. Now, the job of an election administrator, and I can tell you this firsthand, it's a very difficult job. It is a tough job. And across Texas, across these United States, there are Republicans and Democrats and probably folks from any other party or independents who do this job and who work hard to protect our democracy. And we should be supporting those who do that work and their staffs, who protect democracy for us, who provide access to us. We should be providing them with the resources and the gratitude and the dignity that they deserve for doing that tough job. And we're not doing that right now. Our Secretary of State is actively working against election administrators here in Texas. And across this state and across this country, there are election administration offices that are woefully underfunded. Harris County, we dedicate resources to this. This is very important. But we have peers in Texas right now who they don't even have a sign outside of their election locations to say vote here because they can't afford it. Is our state providing those resources? No. And I want to say thank you to Representative Sheila Jackson Lee for signing on to a letter to President Biden to demand those resources, the billions of dollars that are needed across this country, to make voting accessible and to ensure democracy for all Americans. But we certainly care about the rights of Texans and the rights of folks here in the Houston area. And we're not going to take no for an answer. The things that we put in place, the thoughts that we put in place and that we enacted in 2020 to make voting easier, to make it simpler, we're going to keep doing that. And we're going to keep fighting in Austin and in Washington to demand that our rights as Americans, the right that we have by birth or by our oath to this country, is protected, and that we can participate in a fair and free democracy that is going to keep this a free country. I'll stop there. Thank you.
I promise we have two more and then we'll take questions. And I'm going to bring up Deputy Chair of our primary committee here at the Harris County Democratic Party, Rob Itchison, to talk a little bit about the process of what we saw Tuesday and throughout early vote. So here's Rob.
Thank you, Otis. My name's Rob Itchison. I'm the Deputy Chair of the Harris County Democratic Party primary committee. So I've been deeply involved in the administration of this election from the party side of things. I also stand before you here as a former election worker who Ken Paxton tried to indict for my work in the 2020 presidential election. I say he tried to indict. He tried and failed to indict me in Montgomery County in secret. So this stuff is pretty personal to me and my family. So we've always asked our election workers to do hard work. That's not a new thing. Our election workers do challenging work. We need to understand that. So we need to understand that our election workers, they have to understand the rules. You know, those rules that are pretty complex. We ask them to administer those rules. We ask them often to explain those rules to voters. They got to do that while we ask them to run a logistic operation that involves managing lines, that involves dealing with equipment, all at locations that are temporarily retrofitted for an election. There's no election building. We use buildings that are designated each election cycle separately. So we're asking them to do this very difficult work. On top of that, our election workers, so in addition to working at these election sites, we ask them, most importantly, to exercise good judgment. While doing all of this, we say, you election worker, in fact, the election code requires them to exercise discretion, good judgment, hard decisions. That's part of being an election worker. So let's be clear, our election workers are and always have been the unsung heroes of our democracy. Okay? We all need to understand that. Everyone in Harris County, everyone in the state, everyone in the country needs to understand that. And these people, they're tough. They can take a lot. But now we've got SB 1, okay, where Texas Republicans have said to our heroes, our election workers, they said, hey, do that same work, that same difficult work that every election cycle is always challenging. But now, you, election worker, you can go to jail for an honest mistake. Okay? For an honest mistake. And on top of that, we haven't heard this today yet, Republicans have empowered hyper-partisan poll watchers who, let's also understand that the Secretary of State has created guidance where they encourage poll watchers to act like vigilantes at locations in order to manufacture problems so they can try to justify their voter suppression law. It's a strategy of intimidation, and it permeates elections across the state now because of SB 1. And let's be clear, election workers from full-time employed folks at the elections administration offices and county clerks across the state, to poll workers at election sites, to folks working in central counting stations, to folks working on ballot boards. All of them now operate under the specter of SB 1. That good judgment we ask them to exercise, those hard decisions, those choices we ask them to make, they now have to make those choices, knowing that the most partisan and lawless Attorney General this state has ever seen might decide that they are a witch worth hunting. It's shameful. It causes a chilling effect. It causes a culture of intimidation, and there's no place for it in our state, and I stand here united to fight it. Thank you.
Thank you, Rob. And then also we'll have our League of Women Voters member and a suppressed vote by mail voter, Pam Gaskin, who's coming all the way from Fort Bend County.
Good to see you. Good to see you.
Thank you and good morning. A wise man once told me, if you're going to tell a lie on me, I'm going to tell the truth on you. So today we're telling the truth. Here's the story. The story is not about Harris County not getting in their vote count by 7 p.m. the day after the election. The election code says that you have to canvass the votes. And guess what? Our military men and women have an extra 4 days to get their ballots in, so all the votes can't be counted until at least 4 days after election. That's the truth. All the votes are not ever going to be counted within 24 hours of the election. Just not, it's not in keeping with our law. Second, every county in Texas experiences damaged ballots. Let me credentialize for a moment. I have worked on the ballot board. I have this experience. I have registered voters in both Fort Bend and Harris County. So I have some experience with this. Every county has damaged ballots, and you have to deal with those damaged ballots, and guess what? It is a labor-intensive process to get it right. Because one thing that I know from working on a ballot board is that election workers, the election officers and workers that I worked with in Fort Bend County are all people who want to do a good job, an excellent job, and make sure that every voter's vote is counted. Now let me talk about mail-in ballots, because I'm a victim of a mail-in ballot fiasco. But it didn't stop me because my vote was cast. But I worry about people who are similarly situated to me. I am a senior citizen. I will be 75 years old tomorrow. I'm probably in pretty better shape than most 75-year-olds, and I still got a lot of fight left in me. But think of the 75-year-old who has problems with mobility, who has problems just getting in and out of bed even. And they get a rejection letter and they say, well, you know, this is not a fight I can fight today. It's going to take every ounce of energy for me to just get up and do my activities of daily living. Let me say this to the Republican Party. You have made a mistake with Senate Bill 1. If you claim to be as for the people as you are, admit your mistake, fix this, and let us get on with our first right of citizenship, which is the right to vote. It should not be taken away, it should not be suppressed, and it should not be abridged in any form or fashion. That's the truth. Media, the real story here is about those some thousand ballots that were thrown out, not the 1,600 ballots that were damaged. The ballots that were thrown out because of these silly rules about ID. Remember, Every citizen who requests a mail-in ballot is already a registered voter. All we are doing is attempting to exercise our right to vote. So the truth is that we have ballots that have been thrown out. Ask about those. Call into account those. And you will find out that most of those ballots, those ballots are Democratic ballots and Republican ballots. Republicans used to vote a whole lot more by mail-in ballot than Democrats do. I don't know what it is now, but they're throwing out their own votes. And so if you want to talk about and sow the seeds of distrust, fear, and intimidation, then you'll keep reporting on those 1,600 ballots. If you want to tell the truth, if you want to inform and not incite, you will talk about those ballots that got thrown out. Thank you.
Thank you all so much. And as we close, before we take questions, you know, one of the things that we've talked about here in Harris County is what happened with our ballots. I know people are frustrated. I know there was a process that we are going to improve on. In fact, before Tuesday happened, we already agreed with the Republican Party and the Election Administrator's Office to do a postmortem, have a meeting. We are going to do that. We're also going to have a town hall with our election workers. We're going to invite the Election Administrator's Office to come and listen to what the election workers went through on Election Day. That's how you solve problems. You engage the voters, you engage the people that are in the process. We're also going to put pressure on the Secretary of State's office. We have legislators here. You cannot pass a bill like SB 1 and not educate the voters about the changes that you've made. That makes zero sense. That's why this bill has done exactly what it's designed to do, and now they're instilling fear. A senator from Senate District 7 yesterday was talking to you all about irregularities. You know what he's doing? He's laying the foundation so that way in November they can question the very same election that they're going to benefit from. How can you have irregularities when we have 10 days to still canvass and make sure that every vote is counted? Do not let them do this. Do not let them cast doubt in your mind that your voice doesn't matter or that your vote won't count. Democratic neighbors, Republican friends, independent voters, check on your status. Visit the Secretary of State's website. Make sure your driver's license ID, make sure your Social Security number is aligned. Legibly put your email and your phone number so that way they can contact you and create those mistakes, because we don't want the same thing that happened to Representative Rosenthal happen to anybody else that is trying to express their freedom to vote. Make sure you're doing that. And the way we fix this problem, it's simple. November 8th, 2022, you make sure you elect Beto O'Rourke. You make sure you elect more Democrats than Republicans so we can fix the mess that the Republicans continually put us in. And it starts with your vote. If you want Medicaid expanded, if you want your wages raised, if you want public schools adequately fixed and funded, if you want your grid to finally be fixed so we're not in PTSD mode at supermarkets lined up in lines because we're afraid of freezing to death, or this summer where we're going to see record numbers of heat, elect Democrats up and down the ballot. Every time Democrats are elected, we deliver. That's not opinion, that is fact. That is absolute fact. So do not let these Republicans come to you with irregularities and things like that. There's a process, we are human, and we're going to fix it. We're going to talk to each other, and once again, Democrats are going to clean up the mess that they've created. We'll take questions now.
How frustrating is it to have the souls of distrust being sent from the top and the state level down to the county level, especially here in Harris County with the tax being on the elections administrator and as well as Joseph Hidalgo?
Yeah, it's very frustrating. We've had calls since September, I believe, Rob, with the Republican Party, with the Election Administrator's Office. Look, we're going to get better at this, but it's frustrating. You know, we had a conversation with the Secretary of State's office the day of the election. Next thing you know, on Twitter, we find out that they put out guidelines. Instead of coming down to help having a conversation. They ran a Twitter because they wanted to be ahead of the PR game. This is not a joke. People are trying to vote. They're trying to exercise their freedom. But we know exactly what they're trying to do. So it's very frustrating. I think you can see from our speakers and our elected officials, we've been screaming about this since Donald Trump's been telling everyone that this election, the 2020 election, was a lie. So it's very frustrating, and we're gonna rectify the situation. We're gonna talk to our voters, and we're gonna make sure Democrats come out here in 2022. Yes, sir.
Can we say that the Democratic Party is not calling for Isabel Longoria's resignation as the Republicans are, but you still want to fix the problems because there are voters that are wondering if this is going to happen again in November. So are you saying that we should keep Longoria?
First and foremost, I think it's very rich that the Republicans called a press conference to fire election administrator when Stan Stannard was in charge of elections for over a decade, and we didn't wait till 4 o'clock in the morning to get election results. So I think that's very hypocritical on their part. Secondly, what I've told everyone is that we must do an analysis of what happened, what we can course correct. We're not in the business of calling for people to be fired when we haven't done an investigation ourselves. Our county commissioner's court hasn't done that. Our elected officials who will be involved in the process, we haven't even heard back from our election workers. Yes, we've gotten emails in spurts, but we want to make sure that they're together, we hear what is happening, and let the elections administrator be a part of that process. So I'm not here to engage in hysterical comments and hyperbole, because that's exactly what the Republicans want to happen.
I was there at the press conference yesterday, and you want to say something?
I do. Yeah, I do. Get your question out, and then.
I was going to ask Mr. Host to say it in Spanish. Yesterday, I was asking the state senator,
Betancourt.
and he couldn't tell me if he was thinking that there was fraud in this primary election. But then I heard another representative of Texas, of the state legislature, saying that he hopes there's no malice in all these problems. What do you say to those that are still saying to the voters, hey, they might cheat on you again?
Yeah, I'm going to yield to Chairman Hinojosa, and I'm going to try to answer the frustration question. But I do want to acknowledge all of the persons who have come here this morning. Representative Wu and Rosenthal. Rob, I think, is a chilling story as to the point that I'm going to make. And thank you, Chairman. It shows we're in the fight. All of you, Chris, representing Commissioner Ellis's office, Senator Miles' office, but you're friends of Commissioner Ellis. But you're representing our very good senator, and thank you, Pam, very much. Let me tell you what is being created here. It's a battleground. I think when you use the word frustration, no, it's a battleground. It is pitting plain volunteers. What is Rob? He's a plain volunteer. And he has the horror of potentially having been indicted just because he decided to be a good guy. The intimidation of talking about firing an election administrator, which, by the way, Chris Collins, I think, was hit with so many lawsuits and challenges in the middle of his effort to open up voting in the midst of the pandemic. The county attorney was responding to those lawsuits. And I think what happened there is that people were so under the oppression of the pandemic that they couldn't get into the big lie because they were trying to survive, and he was helping us survive through the election, which turned out to be contributing to the largest turnout of votes in the history of the United States. So what we're seeing now, the leaves are parting. The pandemic looks like, through the leadership of President Biden, Vice President Harris, that we're on the other side of it. And so what should be done now? The intimidation, the battleground attitude, and what gets headlines? Firing people who you think are Democrats and blaming them for what you have done, criminalizing voting and not giving resources and running to the media with a big lie. So my point of this is to as Chairman Hinojosa comes, is to really, what we need to do is we've got to take the stigma away from voting from people who are now going to be looking to the runoff and then looking to the general election, because stigma in voting, meaning it creates fear and you stay home. That means the party advocating the big lie is the victor. And I don't want to leave today by not saying to voters, you are the victor because you have the vote. And you can make the difference. And you can hold your vote for what you want to see in your life. And that's what we're standing here for, is to get out and vote. We'll fight the intimidation, we'll fight the stigma, we'll fight against these dastardly laws, but do us a favor. Democrats want you to vote. And as our chairman has said, you know that we can not only deliver, but we can get results. That is the important point of this. And so voting is our salvation. Chairman, thank you so very much.
Let me, you wanted me to respond in Spanish? Okay.
In your own words.
Yeah.
In the church, they say in your own way.
It was my first language anyway. But let me just say, it's ironic that I listened to the press conference this morning, as I mentioned to you all. My communications director had recorded it. And the biggest complaint was going past the 24-hour requirement, right? And the irony of this is coming from Republicans that they're still counting the results of the 2020 election. I mean, so this is what was just absolutely ridiculous about this complaint. But let me tell you, uno de los problemas que nosotros hemos tenido en las elecciones aquí en el estado de Texas ha sido participación de parte de los votantes hispanos. En nuestra cultura, mucha gente no ha ido a votar porque están intimidados del proceso. Tienen miedo que no lo van a hacer correcto, tienen miedo que los van a acusar de hacer algo ilegal. Y mucha gente trabaja muchas horas, salen del trabajo y a veces no piensan que votar es importante. Y nosotros en los últimos 10 años hemos trabajado bastante duro para tratar de convencer a nuestros votantes que el proceso de votar es muy importante para sus familias y para su comunidad. Lo que han hecho los republicanos en esta ley de SB1 es pasar una ley para hacerlo más difícil para nuestros votantes para que vayan a votar. Entonces, ahorita estamos en una batalla tratando de convencer a votantes hispanos que vayan a votar. Al mismo tiempo, los republicanos están tratando de convencerlos que no vayan a votar, porque a lo mejor van a hacer algo ilegal y van a cometer una ley que los van a causar de tener cargos criminales.
¿Ustedes no quieren que se vaya la señora Locoyo?
Yo digo esto, esta es una cosa que los republicanos han tratado de hacer para quitarse de la realidad de lo que ha pasado aquí. Esta ley es lo que ha causado los problemas, no esta persona. Esta ley, que el intento era para prevenir, para parar hispanos y gente de color de votar. Ese es el problema. Ellos saben bien que ese es el problema. Ese era el intento de ellos, pero saben bien que los resultados enseñan que su ley está trabajando. Entonces ellos quieren quitar la conversación de su ley legal y dirigirla a una persona para tratar de enseñar que la razón que hubo problemas era por ella. No, la realidad, la razón que tuvimos problemas era que esta ley hizo lo que debía de haber hecho, que es hacerlo más difícil para personas que vayan a votar y convencer a nuestra gente que a lo mejor no vale la pena de ir a votar.
really hear from Chris. You've been an elections administrator before. You know how difficult this is. You also worked with Isabel Longoria. Can you respond just to the characterization of Tuesday's primaries being in Republicans' words of fiasco and also their calls for Isabel to resign or be fired?
Yeah, I just want to repeat the job of the election administrator and the entire staff, because we're talking about hundreds of people and thousands of volunteers, is an extraordinarily challenging job. And to execute an election at the scale and magnitude of Harris County is even more difficult than one might imagine. And I identify with the long nights and the long hours that it takes to do that, and to do it well, and to do it correctly. And so the important thing here is that every single vote that gets cast is counted, and every single citizen who casts their ballot and who wants to vote is able to do that. And that's what we're fighting for day in and day out, certainly on and around Election Day. We are dedicated, and I'm sure the Election Administrator's Office and the broader government here in Harris County are dedicated to ensuring that that is the case. Continuing to do everything that we can, despite this voter suppression law that exists now, despite Texas having already been the most challenging state in the country to cast a ballot, to ensure access, to ensure that everyday citizens can come out and cast their ballots and participate in this process, and to make sure that those votes are going to be counted. And that's going to happen right here.
Wait. A fiasco is if 30% or up to 50% of mail-in ballots get rejected. That's a fiasco. Getting results a few hours later than we normally expect them is the process that we pay for when we demand a paper trail. We got exactly what we asked for. We got exactly what we paid for. You want a paper trail? You want a paper receipt? This is the cost. The end. It can be made a little smoother. It can be made a little faster. But you need to expect longer delays in reporting because the Republicans demanded a paper trail. Because of the big lie, this is the result. A fiasco would be if we lost ballots. A fiasco would be if we miscounted ballots. A fiasco would be if entire boxes of ballots went missing. None of that happened. The ballots were delayed. The count was delayed. The results, the reporting was delayed, and people got antsy and had to go to bed. Boo-hoo. A fiasco is if people who have a right to vote are rejected for technical and nonsensical reasons. That's the fiasco. The fiasco that is here is the bill, the legislation that Dan Patrick and Governor Abbott passed.
Representative Wood, quick follow-up. Speaking of Dan Patrick, he put out a statement afterwards saying what happened Tuesday is, his words, why the Texas Senate will continue to pass even stronger election security reforms. How concerned are you with the next session coming up about further bills like SB 1?
Everything that the Republicans have said, from Senator Bencourt to Dan Patrick to Secretary of State, we already told you they were going to say these things during the last session. We told you that they were passing these laws to build up to the point where they can do this, right? They knew to a T exactly how much this would affect Harris County. They were purposely passing those legislation. In fact, we told them, please include these provisions so they can count the ballots faster. Include these provisions so that we have better collection points. Include these provisions so it's not delayed so much. They specifically rejected those provisions. Why? This was the result they were looking for. So they can complete their narrative because they know that in 2022, their margins, even after their ungodly redistricting and gerrymandering based on racial lines, their margins will still get tighter and tighter and tighter. And they will follow the Donald Trump playbook and cast doubt into our most important institution, because that's the only way they can win. By casting doubt, by having people reject by having people, to this day, you still have Republicans. The Attorney General's debate, you had grown-up adult human beings who could not tell you whether or not President Joe Biden won the election. This is the narrative that they're pushing. We've known they're pushing this narrative. We predicted it. We've told everyone who would listen that from the time they introduced this bill in the last year in the legislature, that this was the narrative that they were going to go for. And here we are, and everyone's surprised.
And I also want to follow up with that and say it's really rich that Lieutenant Governor Dan Patrick is saying that he's going to, do more to pass more laws. He can't even follow the same laws that he's created himself. I mean, think about this. I mean, this is what we are dealing with here in Texas: hypocrisy, feeding into the lie, feeding an insatiable appetite for red meat. When Texans have over and over again rejected that. So, as Dan Patrick, he's going to actually follow his own laws this time and then come back to us about creating new legislation to make elections more secure after their own appointed Secretary of State said it was a safe and smooth election. And by the way, said that we should credit election workers around the state for being creative and innovative during a global pandemic. These are their words. And Pam has something to say too as well.
Dan Patrick told us what they're going to do. When he had his campaign send mail-in ballots unrequested to voters, and then had an envelope that sent them to the Secretary of State's office. This man has worked in state government long enough to know that the Secretary of State's office does not process ballots. When asked why they did that, he said, because we don't have trust in these Democratic-controlled counties. He has laid the groundwork and told you that the big lie, Texas style 3.0, is to cast this doubt on Harris, Dallas, Travis, and those counties that are led by, I don't know what Isabel Longoria is. Isabel Longoria, as far as I'm concerned, is a nonpartisan elections administrator who is only trying to get every vote counted. I am a member of the League of Women Voters. We believe that democracy works best when everyone who can vote does vote. Then we will have true representative government. What we have now is the legislators, the Republican legislators, trying to select their voters instead of the voters selecting their representatives. That is what you should ask Dan Patrick about.
And we'll take one more question, and then if you don't want to do individual wrap-ups, you can. So we'll take one more.
With the petition that was filed a few days ago on the primary that delayed the vote count, I guess, what was the process like for you guys in getting that news? And how difficult is that as an elections administrator to have to deal with the delay, that lengthy of almost a 2-hour delay in counting votes?
You're talking about the petition?
Yeah, on Tuesday they petitioned that the county impound the voting.
Oh, the courts to extend it. Yeah, I mean, look, the reality is that, and just to make it a long story brief, is we just want every vote counted. We just want every vote counted. And this was a bipartisan effort, too. We filed TRO, they filed TRO. Like, this was a bipartisan effort. Now, theirs was a little different. They wanted to just keep throwing people under the bus. But the reality is that we just wanted votes counted. We wanted voices heard. Both parties had highly contested primaries. We needed all votes counted. And that's just what it was, just simply as that. One attack on the EA's office or anything like that. We have a 2-page system in Harris County. Paper, ink smudged. We have new laws, new office, new machines. So we need some time to make it work out. And again, when you tell the legislature, the Republican-led legislature, because the other thing that bothers me is we got to stop saying it's the legislature. We had 57 Democratic members leave the state of Texas because of the stuff that they were passing this last session, particularly SB 1. It's the Republicans. It's a state leadership, which, by the way, has been under Republican state leadership for 20 years. This is the mess that we find ourselves in over and over and over again. And it doesn't just start with the ballot box. Look at the grid. Look at our wages. We still don't even have Medicaid for people. So yeah, that question turns into things that's not being done, and we've got to rectify that. So yeah, it was quite the deal. So thank you all so much for being here. We really appreciate it. And if you have questions for any of these folks, I'm sure they'll be more than happy to answer.